If you work at a company that runs a lot of web applications, you probably heard of Kubernetes if you're at all touching this job of ops. And basically what Kubernetes does is orchestrate all the different containers you might have. Now, if you're a Google or Netflix, you might have thousands of these things out there all over the world. And you want to do stuff like create that depth that we talked about in the job of ops. And you want to manage failover because that's super important, both operationally as you're upgrading stuff and also if a data center or a set of resources goes out. It's really important. And you can imagine that, you can't, there's no like evil genius that can just sit there and like do all this stuff by hand. It can follow these certain rules. And so you can organize it and standardize it and automate it. And that's what essentially this technology of Kubernetes is about. Kubernetes is not the only thing. There's also, I don't have all the statistics. Probably the one I hear about the next most frequently is Apache Mesos with an add-on thing called Marathon. And that's worth noting. I mean, Kubernetes is its own discrete piece of software, and it's run on a hosted basis by companies like Google, and I'm sure Amazon has an offering at this point. But it is also sort of a platform. So there's a lot of applications or things that work sort of on top of Kubernetes or in tandem with Kubernetes because it's such a, this job of orchestration is so big and so varied for different companies. So under the hood of Kubernetes, and I borrowed this diagram here from the Kubernetes project. It is an open source project. Basically, we've got our Docker engine running on a physical, on the top of an operating system, on top of a physical host out there somewhere. And that's what this is. These two things are the same. And then there's this process called the kubelet. And this is what communicates with Kubernetes. There is this Kubernetes master out there, which is its own server. I mean, probably set up in this same way. But the idea is that there's a master out there, which is the control point that administrators use to encapsulate the logic they want Kubernetes to implement and also go into for monitoring and manually making changes and things like that. And so the master invokes all these commands to this kubelet that says, turn yourself up, turn yourself off, things like that. And inside an individual node, this is a Kubernetes node. And so it would sort of map, a node would sort of map to one of these here, an instance of Docker, running bins and running an app. Inside one of these nodes are these various pods. And these are logical application instances that Kubernetes creates. And they, as you can see, they're all sort of different. This purple thing is a volume, so storage, disk space, where you can put data. And these are one or more containerized apps. I generally see just one app per pod usually, but it doesn't need to be the case. You can put multiple apps per pod. Sometimes there's cases where apps want to be deployed together all the time, and that might be a reason to have two of these. So that's the basic topology. We have one of these Docker instances. Inside of it is one or more of these pods, often just one. And inside of each pod are these apps that are running and these storage containers. And what this does is basically allow you to pack in all these Kubernetes instances, and you can do things like organize these into a logical set across a region or the whole world, where you could say, hey, if we talked about latency, for example, if latency on a certain metric drops below a certain point, start turning up more of these until it gets back to the place where we wanted. You can imagine how automating that process and having a machine, an algorithm monitor that and do it is way more reliable and way less tedious than having a human do it. So that's what Kubernetes does, is this job of container orchestration, and using this Kubernetes technology or container orchestration in general is an increasingly important part of the job of ops as teams look to scale and automate more of what they have to do to keep their application running the way that they want.